rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Welcome everybody to Thursday's edition of End of the Age. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries, and I want to thank you for joining me today. I've got a lot of information to cover today, so I'm going to dive right off into it. I'm going to talk to you today about precursors to the mark of the beast. Now, many of you are familiar with the mark of the beast. Anytime you say 666, mark of the beast, the Antichrist, most people know what that's all about, but I want to talk about that today because there's efforts going on in the United States to give everyone a national ID card or a national identification system being set up, and it's precursors to the mark of the beast. So let me give you a vivid picture of what's going on first, and then we'll dive off into some of the things that's going on in the United States and around the world today to set up this system that was prophesied in the book of Revelation 2,000 years ago. So Italian author and Holocaust survivor Primo Levi, years after his liberation from the Auschwitz concentration camp, made this very key statement. He said, "My name is 174517. We," referring to the Jews that came out of the concentration camps, "will carry the tattoo of numbers on our arm until we die." It seems that this is the only real, true initiation into the concentration camps. Only by showing one's number can one get bread and soup. So this is a statement that Primo Levi made after coming out of the concentration camps years later. Well, on my recent trip to Israel, our tour group visited Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. As I made my way through the endless newspaper clippings, videos, and pictures of the Holocaust, I came across a specific section devoted to the numbering of Jews by Hitler, and in particular, this quote by Holocaust survivor Primo Levi. It was his account of the identification numbers tattooed on the Jews upon the entering of the Auschwitz concentration camp at that time. The numbering system was used by the Nazis for all sorts of identification purposes, including individual race, work permits, corpse identity, and of course the acquisition of food at that time. According to Mr. Levi, having no identification number in Hitler's concentration camp meant zero chance of survival. So as I stood there looking at all of those tattooed individuals, both young and old, I couldn't help but think of how similar this was to the numbering system that will be used by the Antichrist to force the entire world to comply to his world governing scheme, to his edicts. It's very simple. He'll turn the entire globe into another Auschwitz by branding everyone with their own unique identification number, which will then be required to function in society, and then threaten to invalidate that number if they don't conform. Well, there are those that would like to believe such a system of tyranny will never happen again. It's almost inconceivable, but don't be deceived. The numbering system of the Jews at Auschwitz occurred only 70 short years ago, and a vast majority of countries in the world already have fully functioning under national ID systems or numbering schemes in place which allow their citizens to purchase property, open a bank account, or access government benefits. The implementation of a federally mandated national ID is simply an effort by the government to control all aspects of each citizen's life. Imagine a time when you, a United States citizen, would have to show your papers or ask permission of the government to work a job, to travel, purchase property, and be told what goods and services you can or cannot purchase. Once Americans become fully reliant on a government-issued numbering system for their very survival, Auschwitz, our concentration camp, is not very far behind. So, if you are pro-communism or socialism, same thing, pro-globalization, pro-one-world government, and into dictatorships ruling the masses, then a national ID is right up your alley. But we Americans, we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. Or are we becoming the land of the enslaved and the home of the scared? Now, although the list of reasons against a national ID are endless, let me give you just a few of the main reasons why America has pushed against a national ID for about 240 years now. Number one, the loss of freedom. Ron Paul stated, "This is America, not the Soviet Russia. The federal government should never be allowed to demand papers from American citizens, and it certainly has no constitutional authority to do so." American citizens do not want to be told where they can go, how they can get there, what goods and services they can and cannot purchase, or whether or not they can get a job. If implemented, a national ID card or numbering system could give the government control over each of these areas of our lives. We're already closer than you might think. Try to get a job, open a bank account, purchase a car, or even vote without your Social Security number today. It's not possible. Number two, loss of privacy. It's why we fought against a national ID card for so many years. Loss of our privacy. There is a twofold danger with a federal database, which is what they'd like to establish. Number one, who has access to your personal information? If they got a huge database on you, who's got access to that? Number two, why do they want it? What are they wanting to do with your personal information? Things that you would never tell anybody openly. Why do these people want that? Number three, loss of control. According to Jim Harper of the Cato Institute, recently proposed immigration bills would require within 4 years all employers to check the employment status of all new hires. Well, this does two things. It turns all employers into federalized immigration agents while dictating their hiring practices. And number two, in order to work in America, all citizens would have to show proof of identity and employment authorization or a card that meets the same requirements of the Real ID Act. American citizens have never had to show their papers to get a job, but recently proposed immigration bills would change all of that if implemented. Number three, loss of individual rights. The Fourth Amendment ensures privacy for every United States citizen. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, in their houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. No warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause. Therefore, it should be considered illegal for the U.S. government to require citizens of the United States to participate in a centralized database where private information is readily available. So, the negative implications of a national ID or numbering system in America, they're endless. But when you peel away the layers and understand the ultimate goal, it's simple. It's all about control. The reason you number people is to be able to control them. The fact is, our government thinks it knows how to run our lives better than we do. give every person in the United States their own unique identification number, and then force them to rely on that number for goods and services, and then threaten to invalidate that number if they do not comply with the government's edicts. So today, here is my overwhelming concern. There is a prophecy in the Bible that says a world dictator, or we know him as the Antichrist, will soon come on the scene and implement a numbering system very similar to that proposed in recent immigration bills and with the Real ID Act, signed into law by President Bush in May of 2005. Is it possible that we are seeing throughout the world and now in America precursors to this very system? It's found in Revelation 13, verse 16 through 18. It's the mark of the beast. Most of you will recognize it. And it describes the economic system that will be used by the Antichrist to force every citizen in the world to pledge allegiance to him and the world government that he will control. It states, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man, without this mark, no man would be able to buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So the Antichrist, when he comes on the scene, will force everyone on earth to have their own unique identification number. Once they take this number and rely upon it to function in society, he will then use the threat of economic sanctions to force each person to pledge allegiance to his global governing system and to him personally. Anyone who follows prophecy knows anything about the Bible has heard about the prophetic implications of the mark of the beast. There's ramifications if you take that. It's found in Revelation 14, verse 11, and it states, "And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever," remember, "receiveth the mark of his name." The thought of an eternity in hell is why many people revolt against. Be honest with you, in today's society, it's why many people revolt against any kind of a numbering scheme by the government. So let's talk about it today real quick in the time that we have left. I've read several articles recently that say, and I've actually written an article on this lately, that there are people, because they can't understand the prophecies of the Bible and still do this. But there are people, I mean thousands of people, that are putting chips under their skin now in order to do all sorts of different things, to operate a Bluetooth, to unlock a car door, to do all kinds of different things. One guy that we just heard about, he actually implanted a device and programmed it to where he could bypass his boarding pass and get on an airplane by swiping his hand, and he went ahead and got on the airplane. Didn't even have to have a boarding pass. He just programmed the chip that was in his hand. There's also a building in Sweden where they're issuing everybody that needs access to the building, it's called a smart building, and they're actually putting chips in their hands. If you want to work here, if you want to be a tenant in the building, you have to have a chip to have access to the building. So there are people all over the world that are already putting chips in their hands. And so it's becoming a fad. It's becoming very popular. Well, how can somebody like that look at the scriptures of the Bible and say, there's going to come a world-leading politician on the scene that's going to put a mark in people's right hand or in their forehead, and get them to rely on that number to function in society. You'll need that number to purchase food, to have a job, to have access to education for your children, to have access to health care for your family. You're going to need that to function in society, to open a bank account, to travel, to do anything. You won't be able to get a driver's license without that number. The Antichrist is going to give everybody their own unique identification number, and without that number, you're not going to be able to buy or sell. Now that's what's coming. The Bible prophesies it 2,000 years ago, and it's for the time just ahead when the Antichrist comes on the scene. He's going to roll out this system. The thing is that it's not going to be set up day one when the Antichrist is revealed and then start. There's precursors that are already being formed in the earth. They're already being set up. The system is being set up now. So when the Antichrist comes on the scene, it's already going to be implemented, and he'll be able to say, okay, without that number, if you don't pledge allegiance to me and my world governing body, I'm going to invalidate your number, and you're not going to be able to function in society. The Bible says without that number, no man would be able to buy or sell. On the flip side of that, though, the Bible says anybody who does that will spend eternity in the lake of fire. Why? You say, well, what about these people that have already taken a chip in their hand? Are they lost? Have they already taken the mark of the beast? Well, at this point, I don't believe they've taken the mark of the beast, because there's two parts to actually taking the mark of the beast. Number one would be taking a mark of identification. Now, I believe that these people are dangerously, I would never do that. That's a number one no-no in my book. Never take a mark of identification on my person anywhere. But number two, I would never pledge allegiance to. That's one of the main things, that's the main thing that the mark of the beast, the Antichrist, will require, is total allegiance to him and his world governing system. That's what it's all going to boil down to, is absolute control with no means of resistance. And so that's what's going to be, that's why they're going to want to put a mark on you, because they want to number you, just like in Hitler's concentration camps in Auschwitz. Primo Levi knew that when you entered Auschwitz, they labeled you, and if you didn't have a number, in other words, when the Jews would come in, they would say, okay, this guy is a worker, so they give him X number and they go off to the work camps. This guy is a skilled person, so we'll use him in this skill. So they give him X number and he does that. If you were given a number, then you were given access to what little food that they got, because you were a worker or you were a skilled tradesman and you got a number. Or if you were a potential worker, if you were a young child or something like that, they would give you a number and hey, we'll keep this person around. But if you weren't given a number, there was no access to food, and most times you were shipped off to one of the torture places or one of the incinerators or one of the gas chambers. And so without that number, no access to anything. Well, in looking into the future, that's the same way it's going to be with the mark of the beast. Anybody who does not conform to the Antichrist and his one world governing system, you can read all about it in Revelation 13. Revelation 13 describes the world government. It describes the world religion that will partner up with that world government ran by the Antichrist to support that and help prop it up and pull the religions of the world into obeisance to that one world governing body. And anybody who does not want to do that, they're going to look to the mark of the beast to force them economically. Right now, the international community, or the world governing body, the United Nations, the international community, the world government, it's all the same thing, the New World Order. If a country doesn't do what they want them to do, to bow down to their edicts, they economically sanction them. You understand about Iran. They didn't want them to get a nuclear weapon, so they put economic sanctions on them to try to make them bow down to their edicts. And when Iran said no, They put more sanctions on them. And get them, they were cutting off access to their finances and billions of dollars, and Iran crumbled and said, okay, we're ready to negotiate. Well, of course, we signed a totally bogus treaty with them. And of course, they're going to end up doing what they want to anyway. And we gave them the whole $150-some billion back. And Iran pretty much got what they wanted because I think they had their man on both sides of the table. But the key is that the international community, we're already seeing precursors to the mark of the beast. In many ways, they're willing to economically sanction countries who do not bow down to their edicts. Well, when the Antichrist comes on the scene, it's going to come from an international level down to a national level down to an individual level. They're going to give each and every individual their own unique identification number. And if you don't comply with the edicts of the Antichrist, they're going to economically sanction you. Imagine today, now the Social Security number is not the mark of the beast, okay? But imagine today if I said, I'm going to invalidate your Social Security number. Okay, what kind of ramifications would that have? You couldn't hold a job. You wouldn't have no access. You couldn't open a bank account. You wouldn't have access. You couldn't file a tax return. You got to have a Social Security number for that. You couldn't buy a car unless you found some way to pay cash to your brother-in-law or somebody. But you couldn't go to a car dealership and buy a car. You couldn't run a business because you couldn't file your taxes. So look how reliant we are upon numbers today. Have you ever been to a gas station and put your card in there, and for some reason, whether it's the gas station or you were overdrawn or something, you put your card in there to get gas and it says invalid, no access to this machine today? What do? There's not one thing you can do. You got to go either call the bank or go inside and see the teller at the gas station, because if your number doesn't work, you can't function. Well, okay, now look forward to when the Antichrist comes on the scene. The Bible prophet John prophesied 2,000 years ago that in the end time, just before the second coming of Jesus Christ, a political figure would come on the scene that would rule the entire earth. And he would implement a system of numbering every individual. And without that number, no individuals would have the ability to function in society or be able to buy or sell. So that's what we're talking about that. And it's very key that we understand this, because we can sit here and go through life, and life can just pass us by, and we're worried about paying bills, and we're worried about all these different things. And you realize that the world government right now is handing down edicts from on high, and all of the nations of the earth are signing on to them without even really knowing the ramifications of what's coming. I.e., perfect example, the Sustainable Development Goals that even every nation on earth, they passed unanimously, every nation on earth signed on to in September of last year at the United Nations. Those are an effort by the world government, the United Nations, to globally govern the world. And even our President Obama, signed the United States onto these. And we've already seen effects. We'll be doing programs and writing magazines on it in the future. We're already seeing effects of the Sustainable Development Goals being implemented here in the United States of America. Even though we signed a Declaration of Independence, it's irrelevant. The current administration has stepped over that and said, yes, United Nations, tell us what edicts that you have from on high. The Sustainable Development Goals, the paper is called Transforming Our World by the 2030 Agenda. And so we've actually signed on to that. So what have we done? We've given the United Nations greater control over our nations. What is this? It's a precursor to the mark of the beast. Remember, the system is being set up slowly, and they're not just they're not just standing up and making a grand announcement and saying, here's what it is day one, boom. That's not what they're doing. They're doing it, it's just by passing a little law here, a little resolution here, and they're slowly slipping it in. And in America, there are several ways where they're trying to implement a national ID. Now, I realize that in the time that I have left, I've only got a couple minutes left in this first segment. But if many of you can only listen to us on the first 30 minutes of the program of your radio station, I realize that. So if you want to listen to the rest of the program, because what I'm going to be getting into is the several ways that it's being implemented, or its efforts to being implemented here in the United States and around the world. Most nations are already fully functioning under a national ID system around the world. What they'll do is they'll go into these underdeveloped countries and they'll just force that down the people's throat. They don't even have a choice because they have no means to fight it. But when you talk about a country like the United States, then it's a little bit more difficult just to go in and implement that. So they're a little bit more delicate in the ways that they're doing it. But in the last 30 minutes of the program, so everybody that's watching or that's listening to me on the radio, and he only covers your first 30 minutes, join me, go to endtime.com to watch the full hour of this program, because in the last two segments, I'm going to talk about how it's being implemented here in the United States, and I will issue a plea, because we have congressmen, senators, we have subscribed, many of you have subscribed, congressmen, senators, the governors, each and every one of these to our End Time magazine, and I've got response back from them letting me know that they're reading it. So I know a lot of them listen to our radio program. So I'm going to make a plea to them before the program is over to stand against implementing a national ID here in the United States, because we signed a Declaration of Independence and nothing should supersede that.
It's our biggest sale ever. Save up to 50% on most of Endtime Ministries products, today through April 15th. And now, here on End of the Age, is today's top deal.
Take 20% off the Endtime University DVD series starting at $4.40 per lesson. Endtime University is designed to take you down the road to spiritual maturity and to be a dependable companion for your study of the Bible. The semesters consist of Understanding the Bible, Keys to Spiritual Growth, The Life and Teachings of Jesus Christ Parts 1, 2, and 3, and Satan Defeated, Sonship Restored. To enhance your study, we also offer workbooks, which include outlines and quizzes for each lesson. And when you're finished, receive a completion certificate for each semester.
Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com to find out about all our exciting deals.
Be encouraged about the great plan God has for our generation at End Time Prophecy Conferences. Come be in an atmosphere of people who are excited about living in the generation that will welcome back Jesus to the earth. Join us in Bel Air, France, April the 16th through the 17th, Dubuque, Iowa, April the 30th through May the 1st, and Plymouth, Michigan, May the 6th and 8th. For more information, go to endtime.com/events or call 1-800-ENDTIME. Irvin Baxter and our End Time team will look forward to meet you and hope you'll gain new understanding as prophecy continues to unfold.
If your radio station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the Watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the Archives button.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I know that we're talking about a pretty serious topic today, the mark of the beast, and that for it to be fully implemented, the Antichrist is going to have to come on the scene, which we know is, if you follow the ministry at all, it's at least 3.5 years away. That's when the Antichrist will dole out the mark of the beast. But what I'm talking to you about today really is efforts that are being made already around the world globally and here in the United States to implement a national ID system. Now, once you're given there's two ways. You could be given a, many people ask, how will the mark of the beast be doled out? The Bible says you're going to be given a mark in your right hand or in your forehead. Well, there's several ways that could happen. A chip in the hand, a retinal scan, a facial recognition photograph. That's all in your forehead and in your hand, holding a card in your hand. We simply don't know the exact method that everybody will be given their own unique identification number. But that's why we say there's two things you should never, ever, ever do to make sure you don't take the mark of the beast. Number one, never take a mark of identification on your person, an invisible tattoo, a chip, nothing. And don't ever pledge allegiance to the Antichrist and his one world governing system. If you remember those two things, you will ensure that you never take the mark of the beast, because taking the mark of the beast will result in eternal damnation, eternity in the lake of fire. And that's not even an option. So you absolutely cannot do that, because you would be pledging allegiance to the Antichrist instead of the real Christ. That's his goal. Because remember, in Revelation chapter 13, it tells us that Satan is behind the Antichrist effort to rule the world, because he's building his own kingdom. That's his goal. He knows Jesus Christ is coming back to set up his kingdom, so this is his effort to set up Satan's kingdom on earth prior to that. And so consequently, you have to look at really what's behind all of this. What's going to be behind the Antichrist? The Bible says that the dragon, or Satan, gave him his seat, his power, and his great authority. So all of this is being pushed by Satan. So you can't pledge allegiance to the Antichrist, because in doing so, you'll be pledging allegiance to Satan. So no mark of identification on your body, no pledge of allegiance to the Antichrist or his one world governing system. And in the future, you'll be asked to do that. You and I will both be asked to do that. Those are the two things you could never, ever, ever do. So let's talk about America and a national ID. The efforts to implement a national ID here in America over the past several years. On May 13th, 1997, Stephen Moore, economist at the Cato Institute, testified before the Judiciary Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives Subcommittee on Immigration and Claims concerning the establishment of a national identification system. Now remember, this is back in '97. He reminded the committee what happened when a national ID was proposed during a cabinet meeting of the Reagan administration way back in 1981. Then Attorney General William French Smith argued that a perfectly harmless ID card system would be necessary to reduce illegal immigration. A second cabinet member asked, well, why not tattoo a number on each American's forearm? Now get this, just a few decades earlier, they were tattooing numbers on the Jews that showed up to the concentration camp Auschwitz. And somebody in a cabinet meeting to President Reagan actually, in 1981, actually proposed tattooing a number on every American's forearm. Did the guy not know anything about history? Well, according to Martin Anderson, the White House domestic policy advisor at the time, Reagan blurted out the famous statement, "My God, that's the mark of the beast." And you can find that in the congressional record. They actually have that recorded in there. Well, as Anderson wrote, that was the end of the national identification card during the Reagan years. Reagan said, no, it's not going to happen. That's the mark of the beast. Well, of course, most Republican politicians today, they seem to be bending over backwards to cloak themselves in the Ronald Reagan mantle. Yet some of those same politicians are strong proponents of the national ID card called the Real ID. Hillary Clinton supports the Real ID Act, which is a move to implement a national ID in the United States. And Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, and Bernie Sanders all support the E-Verify system to help curb parts of the immigration problem. And if implemented, that could eventually lead to a national ID system. You say, well then, who do we vote for Well, we've got to be prayerful, I can tell you, because I don't see anybody who's going to sweep in and take us to the promised land. None of the top 4 that are left. I don't see that. I know we're going to have to vote for one, and believe me, I've been talking to God and pouring my heart out to Him and saying, God, please give us direction, because at this point, we simply don't know. Now, you and I have all heard of most of these candidates, and they refer back to what a great president Ronald Reagan was. So let's pause a moment to consider the wisdom of Ronald Reagan concerning the national ID. I know that as soon as you start quoting the Bible, some politicians immediately begin to stammer and backpedal. They don't want to align themselves with that. Even here in the United States, God forbid anyone should actually take the Bible seriously. And God forbid anyone would believe a 2,000-year-old prophecy foretelling a time when a person will need a number or an ID card in order to hold a job, enabling the person to buy or sell. Well, how uneducated could you possibly be? But let's humor President Reagan for a moment. What was the biblical basis that caused him to say, my God, that's the mark of the beast? The prophecies found again in Revelation 13. You got to memorize this. Revelation 13, 16 through 17. The Bible says, and he causeth, President Reagan knew this. He studied the book of Revelation. And the prophecy says, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might be able to buy or sell. Won't be able to function in society, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So the 13th chapter of the book of Revelation describes the world as it will be 3.5 years before the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming of Jesus Christ. You know that the Antichrist comes on the scene at the event we call the Abomination of Desolation, which is 3.5 years prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Well, in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 8, describe a world government that will be in power at that time. Verses 11 through 14 foretell a global belief system that will be put in place to support the world government and to prevent war. It's going to be the world religious system at that time, or a one world religion. And then the economic system, the mark of the beast, is described in verses 16 through 17, and it will be used to force the people of the world to submit to the control of the world governing system. If a person refuses to submit to the world government and its interfaith ideology, the individual will not be permitted to hold a job. It will simply be economic sanctions. The favorite tool of now the world community, and in enforcing compliance to its edicts, and on an individual level at that point. So it's very key that you understand this. Right now you can watch in the news when they're sanctioning nations. When the Antichrist comes on the scene, they're going to be economically sanctioning you and I. And what can be a stronger case about bringing somebody into compliance than to get a hold of their pocketbook and to keep them from buying food, buying things that they need? What are you going to do at that point? We really need to ask ourselves the question. Most of you know that we teach a post-tribulation rapture, that we will be here through the whole thing. Now, I know some of you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, and that's fine. It's not a salvation issue. If I pull out of here tonight and get hit by a car, I will be pre-trib. But we believe that the Bible teaches a post-tribulation. We believe we're going to be through here all of this. And so consequently, we need to ask ourselves these questions. Well, the best thing you can do is to be Spirit-led. Have a relationship with the Lord and functioning. If you're Spirit-led at that time, read the accounts in the Bible where those people were Spirit-led. You'll see how that you can function during the time of a world government. The entire New Testament was written during the reign of a world government, Rome. And those guys were Spirit-led, and they knew what to do at certain times. That's how we're going to have to function in the times just ahead. Well, getting back to the program, Reagan was a student of the prophecies of the Bible and was obviously well aware of the mark of the beast prophecy. So let's be real serious for a moment. We're watching the emergence of a system of world government or global governments right now. After all, we're being continually indoctrinated concerning the necessity of the virtues of globalization. We already have a World Bank and International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, the World Court, and of course the United Nations, the establishment of global governance. The terms world community and international community roll effortlessly off our tongues almost without our even thinking about it. Go to Google News, whatever your preferred search engine is, and type in international community. It's the same thing as world government. The international community decided this. Let's take this before the international community. It's world government. It's already being set up. So somehow we have to become very accustomed to such radical statements. Let's say as President George W. Bush saying, Muslims, Jews, and Christians all worship the same God and that all three religions are equally valid. It doesn't shock us when President Obama chooses Muslims, Jews, homosexuals, and evangelicals to pray at our national inaugural services. It seems perfectly normal when former British Prime Minister Tony Blair establishes the Tony Blair Faith Foundation and lectures on faith and globalization at Yale University. The new philosophy of religious inclusiveness is progressing very nicely. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing a merging. Now, the Bible prophesies just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ that a world religion and a world government is going to unite. Okay, we're already seeing that happening on many fronts. We've written tons of articles on it, done radio and television programs, and we'll do many more in the future. But it's already coming to pass. I wrote a huge article last year, a two-part article in our magazine, The One World Religion. It's already established, really. And they're really just waiting to sign documents of justification by faith. Many of them will be signed next year in 2017 at the 500-year anniversary of the Reformation of Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the door in Wittenberg, Germany. The Reformation. Next year is the 500-year anniversary of that, and many of the churches that broke off of the Catholic Church are going to sign documents of justification by faith back with them. It's already been proposed, and the Pope actually has a copy of it that's been proposed that they sign that. So we're already looking at precursors to this merger of politics and religion. And the thing that will bring everybody into compliance, the Bible says, Revelation 13, is the implementation of the mark of the beast. They'll all actually come down to economically sanctioning individuals, and we're watching precursors to this system being set up worldwide right now.
I was listening to Politics and Religion, and I heard an announcement about Endtime Ministries hosting a Bible study on understanding the end time at their headquarters. My husband and I were studying Bible prophecy and had been listening to Irvin Baxter for several years. We began attending the lessons, and immediately our eyes were opened to so much more of the Bible and the prophecies of end-time events. As the Word of God filled our hearts, the Lord began to restore our broken marriage. We continued to grow spiritually with Endtime University. Through revelation and obedience to the Word, we were born again and our lives were forever transformed. This teaching inspired us to share with family and friends, and we began hosting our own end-time Bible study out of the comfort of our own home. We popped in the DVD, served snacks, had wonderful fellowship, and built lasting friendships. There is no greater joy than living for God, sharing the gospel, and helping others understand the prophecies of the Bible. You can do the same in your community too. Go to endtime.com and under Events, click the Bible Studies link or call 1-800-ENDTIME to start your own Endtime Bible study today.
So we're talking today about precursors to the mark of the beast already being established around the world and even here in the United States. So let's talk about that right now. On the brink of a national ID here in the United States. The 2,000-year-old prophecy found in Revelation 13, the mark of the beast states a time will come when people on the earth will be given a number and without which they won't be able to buy or sell. First, such a system has never been possible until right now. Only with the invention of the computer and the birth of the internet could this prophecy be fulfilled. I wonder how the writer of Revelation knew to predict such a system way back in 96 AD. Well, it's obvious. He was moved on by God because the Bible says God knows the end from the beginning. He's already seen these events play out. And He went back and told John to write about it so that you and I would know what was coming. Secondly, just such a system is being implemented in the United States and in most other countries on earth right now. For example, in Uganda. Remember, I said most of these nations that they've implemented this in, and some developed, but most of them, they started out implementing them in underdeveloped nations where people had no means to fight it. So in Uganda, without your national ID card, now I'm talking about in 2016, you can't hold a job, you can't have a driver's license, no access to health care for your family. Without you have that national ID, no access to health care whatsoever. No schools for your family, and you can't travel. So imagine, in Uganda, with no national ID, if you don't have that little national ID card, you can't function in society at all. So what do? These people are very poor. Yeah, they go right in and sign up. Even though with that little number, the government can control them because all they have to do, if you don't bow down to our edicts, when we want you to do something, when we want you to go to war or we want your young men to go to war or whatever, you don't bow down to our edicts and do what we say, invalidate your number, they have no way to function in society. It's already being set up, precursors to the mark of the beast. Well, here in the United States, beginning January 22nd, 2018, passengers, now this is you and I, folks, this is not 10,000 miles overseas. Passengers with a driver's license issued by a state that is not compliant with the Real ID Act and has not been granted as an extension will need to show an alternative form of acceptable identification for domestic air travel in order to board their flight in the United States of America. Passengers with driver's licenses issued by a state that is compliant with the Real ID Act or a state that has been issued an extension, they'll be able to use their driver's license or identification cards. Then, starting on October 1st in 2020, every air traveler will need a Real ID compliant license or another acceptable form of identification for domestic air travel. The Real ID Act will be fully implemented in 2020. Well, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, currently the Department of Homeland Security has determined that 22 states and the District of Columbia are fully compliant with the Real ID Act, leaving most of the remaining states and territories operating under an extension through October 10th of this year, 2016. Several states are non-compliant still. The Department of Homeland Security is continuing to provide extensions as warranted, which are granted for a maximum of 1 year and may be renewed if a state demonstrates continued progress towards compliance. So right now, a lot of states have said, oh, we're not going to implement that. But if you really look at it, go in and try to get a license. And they've implemented many of the 18 steps to comply with the Real ID Act, even though they've said they're not going to. So even though it says that we've said that 22 states have said, no, we're not going to do this, many more states are well on the road to implementing the Real ID Act, which is a push for a national ID here in America. So the final deadline for the enforcement of a national ID card in America or the Real ID Act is October 1st, 2020. But wait, can any intelligent person seriously believe the prophecies written in the Bible 2,000 years ago and that they're actually coming to pass right now? Think about that. Well, according to a poll conducted by the Time and CNN, 59% of all Americans believe the prophecies in the book of Revelation will come to pass. And 20% believe that they will be fulfilled in their lifetime. So it's obvious that President Reagan believed it and nixed the idea of a national ID before it could get any traction during his administration. So, is the real ID card the mark of the beast? The real ID card is not, in itself, is not the mark of the beast. However, it is establishing a system that could be used to implement the mark of the beast as soon as the prophesied world governing body is fully comes to power. Remember, until the Antichrist comes on the scene, the mark of the beast won't be doled out. But once he comes on the scene, that system's already going to be set up and he's just going to implement it. Can it be stopped if it's already prophesied? We get this question all the time. If it's prophesied in the Bible, why fight against it? Well, the mark of the beast is going to be implemented as the enforcement mechanism in the coming one world government. However, there will be some nations in dissent who will not comply with the system of global governance. It is possible. We know that the countries of Israel and Jordan will never come under the reign of the Antichrist. And it's also possible that the United States could be one of those opposing nations. You understand the prophecies in Daniel 7 where the United States is mentioned? When you get to Revelation 13 where all those beasts are mentioned again that make up this world governing body, all those nations are symbolized as animals. The United States is not represented in that world governing body. But if you go back one chapter to Revelation chapter 12, it says that Israel, during the time of the tribulation, Israel is carried away on the wings of a great eagle, where she is nourished in her place for times and half a times, that 3.5-year period. So we believe the United States will be a dissenter to this global governing body, and we will stand with Israel all the way to the end. So what should be done? In light of that, what should be done? Well, the Real ID Act should be repealed, and all other forms of a national ID should be permanently outlawed in the United States. Not only is there a numbering of human beings prophesied in the Bible, but also a national ID is the critical tool that allows a totalitarian government to exercise total control over its citizens. Ask Adolf Hitler why he numbered the Jews. The only reason to number them was control. Ask Ronald Reagan. And ask our forefathers that have adamantly refused the adoption of a national ID for the last 240 years. Do not number the people, because they realized in numbering a person, you can sanction them, you can control them. And that's what the Antichrist is going to try to do. So, what's the real agenda? The real motive behind all of this, it's not the immigration problem that they're trying to solve. That's just a ploy. The leaders of this country are fine with the massive immigration that's taking place, or we'd go down there and shut off our borders. President Obama's fine with that. It's called globalization, or a world without borders. President Obama believes in a one world government. So he's okay with opening our borders and letting everybody come across. We could stop that today if we wanted to. But the current administration just doesn't want to. We could stop it very easily. The nation of Israel does it every day. I was just there and saw their almost 300-mile-long security wall. It works like a dream. They've cut out almost all of their immigration. We've got presidential candidates that are talking about building a wall. All they've got to do is learn from Israel. Israel does it every day, and it works like a dream. So it could be done. Our current administration just simply doesn't want to do it. So in looking to push a national ID, they're not trying to stem illegal immigration. It's all about control. The goal is not to stop illegal immigration. It is the implementation of a national ID to control every United States citizen. That's the goal. The crisis or the method, they don't care. If passed, new immigration laws will give the government power to determine whether or not U.S. citizens can hold a job through the E-Verify system. Through the use of biometric identification systems in recently proposed bills, everyone will have their own unique identification number. And in the near future, the question is, will every United States citizen be forced to become totally dependent upon a number issued by the authorities just to survive? I wonder what Holocaust survivor Primo Levi would think about that. So, a final note to senators and congressmen. If you're a senator, congressman, governor, any lawmaker, anybody who's an influential, we're depending upon you now. Please do not be intimidated by those who say we must have a national ID to stop illegal immigration. That's false. That's a falsehood. Don't be influenced by those who are determined to bring the American people under their control. Please do the manly stand up as a woman if you're a lawmaker and do the right thing. Be strong and very courageous. Preserve individual liberty in the United States. Repeal the Real ID Act and do not approve the mandatory use of E-Verify. If you are not successful in repealing Real ID, make sure your state refuses to comply. This numbering system of control must be stopped at all costs. Please don't forget, control and freedom are opposite terms. America has gotten along without a national ID for 240 years, and we don't need one now. Remember, no national ID, not now, not ever, in any form. We're counting on you, and we're praying for you. And folks, this lets us know how important this election is coming up. You have to know what your candidate stands for. Now, I don't see the perfect candidate. I really don't. Because like I said, Hillary's for the Real ID, which is an effort to implement a national ID here in America. And Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, and Barry Sanders are all for the E-Verify system, which is an effort to implement, if implemented, would lead us down the road towards a national ID system, a database where people would have to ask the government, get permission from the government to get a job. The top 4 candidates are for those. And so I don't see a perfect candidate coming down the line. But I can tell you that you need to know who you're voting for and what they believe, everything that they believe. It doesn't matter whether they comb their hair perfect or they don't, or how they dress. Look at what the issues, what they believe. What are they really going to do? That's what we got to try to figure out. And number one, be prayerful. Put this in the hands of God and ask God that tell God we want His will to be done. The Bible says, if my people will humble themselves and pray, I will heal their nation. So be prayerful. This election coming up is the most important that we've ever faced. If we lose this election to the wrong person, we could lose our country. So we need God in this election, this upcoming election. Be prayerful and study, because the precursors to the mark of the beast are being set up. We're watching them happen right now.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.